The fluorescent lights in St. Helena Private Hospital buzzed faintly as Clara Hayes walked down the pristine white corridor.
Clara.
She had worked here for nearly 2 years, and yet something about this evening felt different, heavier, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Earlier that afternoon, she had received an unexpected summons to the office of Dr. Morgan, the head of neurology. Clara paused before the polished oak door, smoothing her uniform, then knocked softly. "Come in," a measured voice replied. Inside, Dr. Morgan stood near the window, hands clasped behind his back, his sharp eyes fixed on the glowing skyline of the city below. The air smelled of antiseptic mixed with expensive leather, and the atmosphere seemed far more solemn than usual. "Clara," he said finally, turning toward her, "I have a patient who requires special care, but I must warn you, this assignment is not for the faint of heart." Her brow furrowed. "Not for the faint of heart? What kind of patient is this?" Dr. Morgan studied her for a moment, then gestured toward a thick medical file resting on his desk. "Ethan Ward." The name struck Clara like a bolt of electricity. Ethan Ward, the Ethan Ward, even if she hadn't recognized it immediately. The newspaper clipping on the file cover made it unmistakable. A twisted wreck of a sports car beneath a shattered bridge. Headlines screaming of tragedy. A year ago, Ethan Ward, the youngest billionaire in the state, had been in a devastating accident. His sleek midnight blue car had careened off a bridge in the middle of the night. The crash left him in a deep coma from which he had never woken. Once, his name had dominated headlines. Ethan Ward, the ruthless, untouchable CEO of Ward Enterprises, the man who had built a business empire at just 32. Now, he was a shadow of that legend, trapped between life and death, his fortune unable to free him from silence. His family visits rarely, Dr. Morgan continued. Most of the staff perform only the routine necessities. But what he needs is someone who will treat him like he still matters, someone who believes he might return. Clara's lips parted. "And you think that someone is me?" "I do," he said simply. She hesitated, fear whispering in the back of her mind. Caring for a man the world believed lost forever. A man who had once commanded thousands. It was daunting. Yet deep inside, she knew her answer before she spoke it. "I'll do it." Dr. Morgan's eyes softened, though his lips pressed into a firm line. "Good. Your shift begins tonight." The private suite on the hospital's top floor was unlike any other room Clara had seen, where most wards were stark and cold. This one resembled a chamber of quiet luxury, dim chandeliers, heavy oak furniture, curtains the color of midnight, and in the center, surrounded by quiet machinery, lay Ethan Ward. Clara's breath caught. Despite the tubes, the wires, the stillness, he was striking, his strong jawline framed by dark stubble, lashes brushing against pale skin, broad shoulders hinted at beneath the thin hospital gown. If not for the lifeless stillness, he could have been mistaken for a man simply sleeping. But this was no ordinary sleep. This was a silence without end. Clara swallowed, adjusted his fore, and prepared a basin of warm water. She hesitated, cloth in hand, before pressing it gently against his skin. A chill shivered up her spine, an odd sensation she couldn't explain, like somewhere in the depths of his unconsciousness. He knew she was there. The heart monitor beeped steadily, filling the silence. Clara shook her head, forcing herself to focus. She bathed him carefully, wiping away the stillness from his body, maintaining dignity where time had stolen it. "I guess you don't get a say in this, do you?" she murmured softly. "I'll take that as a no." Days became weeks, and soon Clara's visits settled into routine. Every morning and evening, she bathed him, changed his sheets, monitored his vitals. But she found herself doing more talking to him. "You should see the cafeteria food, Ethan. It's tragic even for a billionaire." She chuckled at her own joke. "I don't even know why I keep talking to you. Maybe I just like the sound of my own voice. Or maybe," she added in a whisper, "you're listening." The heart monitor beeped on, steady, unchanging. Yet sometimes, she could almost believe it was answering her. One evening, Clara leaned close, gently wiping the curve of Ethan's jaw when she thought she saw it a twitch, so faint she wondered if her eyes were betraying her. She froze, staring at his still hand. Nothing, motionless. She let out a nervous laugh. "Great. Now I'm hallucinating. Maybe I'm the one who needs a hospital bed. But the unease lingered, and in the days that followed, it happened again. The faintest pressure against her wrist as she adjusted his pillow, a subtle shift of his fingers, too small to call movement, yet too deliberate to ignore. Her heart hammered. "Ethan?" she whispered one night, her voice barely audible. The monitor answered with steady beeps. Was she imagining it? Or was someone stirring within the silence? The night outside St. Helena Private Hospital was hushed, rain tapping against the tall windows like fingertips searching for entry. Inside the top-floor suite, the world was equally quiet except for the steady, mechanical rhythm of the heart monitor that had kept time for nearly a year. Clara Hayes dipped a cloth into warm water, steam curling upward, and wrung it out with practiced ease. She leaned over Ethan Ward, her movements gentle, as though any roughness might shatter him entirely. "You know," she whispered, brushing the cloth across his arm, "I was thinking about getting a dog. At least then, I'd have someone who doesn't ignore me all day." The silence answered, steady and indifferent. Clara sighed, shaking her head. "Rude. I'll just take that as your way of saying no." Her fingers slid carefully across his wrist, and then she froze. The faintest pressure curled against her skin, her breath caught, heart leaping violently against her ribs. She stared at his hand, waiting for the illusion to vanish, but the pressure remained, weak yet deliberate, unmistakably real. "Oh my God," she whispered. Before she could make sense of it, his lashes quivered. Once, twice, then, slowly, his eyelids lifted. Clara's world stopped. She had spent months watching those still lids, praying for any flicker, and now the ocean blue eyes stared back at her, confused, unfocused, but alive. The cloth slipped from her trembling fingers, splashing water onto the pristine floor. "Ethan?" she stammered. His lips parted. A sound emerged, cracked and hoarse, as though dragged from the depths of silence. "CL, era." Her knees nearly buckled. She slammed her hand against the red emergency button. The alarm shrieked through the halls. The door burst open. Nurses, technicians, and a crash cart spilled into the room, led by Dr. Morgan, whose sharp eyes snapped immediately to the patient. "What happened?" he demanded. Clara's voice shook. He grabbed my hand. He opened his eyes. He spoke. Already. Dr. Morgan was at the bedside, shining a light into Ethan's pupils. "Reactive," he murmured, shock thinly veiled beneath his professional tone. He pressed a stethoscope against Ethan's chest. Heartbeat stable, breathing shallow but strong. The room became a storm of motion monitors adjusted, vitals checked, for drips recalibrated. Amid the chaos, Ethan's gaze wandered, disoriented, before it found Clara again. And this time, he didn't look away. Her chest tightened. For a year, he had been a ghost. Now, those eyes tethered her to the impossible. Hours blurred as tests were run. Neuroimaging, reflex evaluations, endless streams of data that left Clara dizzy. But all she could remember was the sound of her name on his lips. When the medical team finally cleared the room, Dr. Morgan stayed behind, exhaustion lining his face. "This is extraordinary," he admitted. "But don't expect miracles overnight. He's weak, disoriented. It will take time, weeks, months to know the full extent of his recovery." Clara nodded numbly, still caught in the echo of that broken whisper. The next morning, the suite was brighter than it had been in months. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, laying gold across Ethan's bed. Clara stood at his side, cautious but compelled. His eyes opened slowly, struggling against the weight of time. They roamed the room before settling on her once more. Clara swallowed. "Do you know who I am?" He frowned faintly, lips cracked, voice rough. "I don't know." But his gaze softened. "I feel like I should." The words sent a shiver down her spine. She managed a shaky smile. "That's all right. We'll start there." Recovery began like the first hesitant steps onto thin ice. Simple things: holding a spoon, lifting his head, forming syllables were monumental victories. Each day, Clara encouraged him, coaxing him past the limits of exhaustion. One afternoon, she guided his trembling hand to a cup of water. He spilled half, coughing, but his stubborn grin made her laugh. "Progress," he rasped. Messy progress, she teased, handing him a napkin, but her chest swelled with pride all the same. Nights, however, were harder. Ethan would thrash awake, breath ragged, sweat darkening his sheets. Clara often rushed in to find his eyes wide, haunted. As if he had glimpsed something monstrous. "Ethan," she soothed, steadying him. "You're safe, you're here." He gripped her wrist with surprising strength. "It wasn't just an accident," he gasped. "I saw someone, a figure, on the road." Clara froze. Before she could respond, exhaustion dragged him back into uneasy sleep, but the words lingered like a ghost in the room. Days turned into weeks. Physically, Ethan improved, walking slowly with support, his voice returning in fragments, yet shadows clung to his memories. He often stared out the window, brow furrowed, as though pieces of a puzzle danced just out of reach. One evening, Clara found him restless, fists clenched in his lap. "I keep seeing it," he muttered. "Headlights, the rain, and then blackness. But right before, there was someone watching." His gaze lifted, heavy with realization. "Clara, someone wanted me dead." Her blood ran cold. Word spread through the hospital of the miraculous awakening. The press swarmed outside the gates, desperate for photographs of the billionaire risen from silence. But inside, the suite remained their world, half recovery room, half battlefield. Clara stayed by his side, torn between awe and fear. She had dedicated herself to keeping Ethan alive. Now, she wondered if that meant protecting him from dangers far greater than a coma. And as his eyes found hers across the quiet room, she realized he wasn't just a patient anymore. He was a man, carrying secrets that could destroy him, and she was the only one he trusted. The city outside St. Helena Private Hospital pulsed with life, traffic honking, neon signs burning in the dust. But inside Ethan Ward's suite, the air was taut with memory. Recovery had given him strength, but it also brought fragments of the night that changed everything. Fragments that clawed at him like broken glass. Clara Hayes sat near the window, flipping through his latest therapy charts. Ethan, no longer confined to the bed, sat upright in a chair, his frame still lean from months of stillness, but his eyes sharper than before. "They say trauma hides itself," he murmured suddenly, his gaze distant. "But mine doesn't want to stay hidden." Clara set the chart down, listening. "It's always the same." Ethan continued. "The road slick with rain, headlights blinding, the railing breaking. And then, before the fall, I see him, a shadow at the edge of the bridge, watching." Clara's pulse quickened. "Do you recognize him?" Ethan shook his head, frustration shadowing his features. "Not yet, but he wasn't a stranger. That much I know." Over the next days, Ethan's progress accelerated. With help from physical therapists, he relearned how to balance, how to walk short distances, how to steady trembling hands. But each stride forward seemed to pull at a knot in his memory, unraveling threads he wasn't ready to see. One evening, as Clara helped him across the room, his body suddenly stiffened. His breath came sharp, his eyes wide with terror. "What is it?" she asked urgently, guiding him back into the chair. Ethan clutched his temples. "Voices. I remember voices, arguing." And then he looked at her, horror dawning. "Clara, it wasn't an accident. Someone paid for it." The words settled between them like shards of ice. Later, while Ethan rested, Clara sat in the nurse's lounge with the file Dr. Morgan had once given her. She read every detail: lab reports, police statements, financial records appended as background. Most of it was clinical, but one entry snagged her attention. An unexplained bank transfer, enormous in scale, logged just 2 days before the crash. She frowned. The recipient's name had been redacted in the hospital copy, but Clara knew what she saw: a trail. When she brought it up to Ethan the next morning, his eyes narrowed. "Show me." Together, they combed through what they could access. Clara used her tablet to search news archives, cross-referencing dates and names. Ethan, despite weakness, sifted through memory like sand, trying to find the gold hidden beneath. Hours stretched into the night. Finally, they found it. A transfer of several $1 million to a known criminal fixture, a man infamous for orchestrating accidents for powerful clients, and the sender's name hit them both like a hammer: Lucas Ward, Ethan's half-brother. Clara felt her stomach twist. Your own brother. Ethan leaned back, his jaw tight. Lucas has always hated me. He grew up watching me inherit the company, the fortune, the attention. I thought jealousy was all it was. But this, his hands curled into fists, this is betrayal. Clara's voice trembled. If he tried once, what's stopping him from trying again? Ethan met her gaze, blue eyes blazing with a mix of fury and grief. Nothing. Unless I stop him first. The next days were heavy with planning. Ethan's attorneys wanted him to focus on recovery, not confrontation. But Ethan was resolute. With Clara's help, he compiled every piece of evidence. They had financial records, timelines, inconsistencies in the crash report. Dr. Morgan quietly supported them, though he warned caution. Lucas is powerful, the doctor said grimly. If you accuse him without absolute proof, he'll bury you both in lawsuits before the truth sees daylight. But Ethan had already decided. For months, he had been voiceless, powerless, trapped in silence. Now that he had his life back, he wouldn't let fear take it again. Clara accompanied him when he left the hospital grounds for the first time since the accident. The world outside was overwhelming, the noise, the lights, the sheer scale of freedom. She stayed close, steadying him when the crowd pressed too near, guiding him through the chaos. Ward Manor loomed ahead, cold and imposing, a fortress of wealth that had never felt less like a home. Ethan paused at the gates, breath catching. It feels different now, he said quietly. Clara touched his arm. Because you know what waits inside. The confrontation was inevitable. Lucas Ward stood in the study, glass of brandy in hand, his smirk curving as though the sight of Ethan alive was an inconvenience. Well, Lucas drawled, swirling the amber liquid, the prodigal brother rises. From the grave, Ethan's voice was low, edged with fury. Why did you do it? Lucas's eyes glinted, cold and sharp. Why? Because you were always the golden child. The empire was yours. The name was yours, everything handed to you while I watched from the shadows. I was tired of waiting for my turn. Clara, standing just behind Ethan, felt her blood run cold. Ethan stepped closer, his voice steel. You tried to kill me for power. Lucas's smirk faltered. I didn't try. You were supposed to die. The words sealed his fate. Hidden officers, waiting at Clara's signal, entered the room. Lucas's eyes widened as handcuffs snapped around his wrists. He shouted, cursed, promised revenge, but the doors closed on his voice, dragging him into the justice he had long evaded. For the first time in months, Ethan exhaled. His shoulders, long burdened with silence and suspicion, finally released. That night, back at St. Helena, the suite felt different. The air was lighter, freer, as if even the machines understood that danger had passed. Ethan sat by the window, moonlight painting his features, and looked at Clara. You stood by me when I was nothing but a shell. You believed when no one else did. Why? Clara smiled faintly, though her eyes shone with tears. Because I knew you weren't gone, just waiting, and I wasn't about to let you wait alone. He reached for her hand, weak but steady, and held it like a vow. I don't know what I'd be without you, Ethan whispered. And for the first time, Clara didn't hold back. She let her fingers entwine with his, knowing their story was no longer just about survival. It was about trust, and perhaps something even deeper waiting to bloom. The storm had passed. Lucas Ward was in custody. The truth of Ethan's crash revealed, and the shadows that had haunted St. Helena Private Hospital seemed to retreat at last. For Ethan, the battle for justice was over, but the battle to rebuild himself and the life he wanted was only beginning. Recovery now felt different. Each step in physical therapy no longer carried only the weight of survival. It carried the promise of a future. Ethan pushed harder, his determination no longer fueled by rage or suspicion, but by gratitude, by the need to claim the second chance he had been given. And always, beside him, was Clara Hayes. She was there when he struggled through his first unaided steps down the therapy hall, her hand hovering close, ready to steady him. She was there when he lifted a cup of water without spilling, when he finally buttoned his shirt alone, when he laughed freely, laughed for the first time since waking. You don't realize, Ethan said one evening, catching his breath after another grueling session. How much strength it takes just to stand, not just the body, but here. He tapped his temple. The will to stay upright. Clara smiled. Softly, I think you've had that strength all along. It just needed a reason. He looked at her then, and she saw it, the shift, the unspoken truth flickering in his eyes. She quickly looked away, her heart betraying her calm exterior. As the weeks passed, Ethan's health improved remarkably. His body was leaner, his face sharper, but the fire in his gaze had returned. Newspapers hailed his recovery as a miracle, the return of the city's youngest billionaire. Investors flooded Ward Enterprises with congratulations, eager for him to reclaim his empire. But Ethan wasn't interested in boardrooms or quarterly earnings. Each time reporters asked about his plans, he answered only, I'm focusing on what matters most. And though the world assumed he meant health, Ethan's eyes told Clara otherwise. One crisp evening, Ethan asked Clara to walk with him in the hospital gardens. The air smelled faintly of pine and damp earth, and lanterns lit the winding path. He walked slowly, leaning on his cane, but his stride carried a quiet confidence for a while. They walked in silence. Then Ethan stopped, turning to face her beneath the glow of a lantern. Clara, he said, voice low but steady. She blinked, startled by the gravity in his tone. What is it? He hesitated, as though weighing every word. When I was lying in that bed, trapped in silence, I wasn't empty, because I had your voice. I can't remember every word, but I remember the way it made me feel like I wasn't alone, like I was worth saving. Clara's throat tightened. You never treated me like a billionaire or a headline, he continued. You saw me as a man, and that saved me more than the machines ever could. Ethan, his hand reached for hers, tentative but firm. I love you, Clara. I don't care what rules there are, or what the world thinks. You are the only reason I'm here. And if I have everything, money, power, and empire, it means nothing without you. Her heart raced, her mind torn between duty and desire. Nurses weren't supposed to cross this line. But Clara knew the truth she had buried for months. She had already crossed it the moment she refused to give up on him. Tears stung her eyes as she whispered, I love you too. From that night, something shifted. They were no longer nurse and patient bound by duty, but two souls tethered by survival, trust, and a love born in silence. When Ethan was finally discharged from the hospital, Clara helped him down the grand steps, cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions. But all he saw was her hand in his, guiding him into the light. At Ward Manor, the place that had once felt cold and hollow, Ethan began to build anew. He renovated the estate, not into a fortress, but into a home. He opened its gardens to charity events, its halls to laughter, determined to turn the symbol of his family's betrayal into a beacon of healing. And through it all, Clara was by his side. One evening, months after Lucas's trial had begun, Ethan invited Clara back to the rooftop terrace of Ward Manor. The city stretched below them, bathed in golden light from the setting sun. A soft breeze stirred her hair, and she laughed as she brushed it from her face. What's this about? She asked, suspicion teasing her voice. Ethan took a deep breath, reaching into his pocket. Clara's eyes widened as he pulled out a small velvet box. He opened it, revealing a delicate diamond ring, its facets catching the last rays of sunlight. But her gaze didn't stay on the ring. It lingered on him, on the tremor in his voice, the vulnerability in his eyes. You didn't just save my life, Ethan whispered. You became my life. Clara Hayes, will you marry me? The world seemed to pause. Clara's breath caught, her vision blurring with tears. Memories flooded back of nights spent talking to a man who could not answer, of the first time he squeezed her hand, of the moment his eyes finally opened and found hers. She nodded, voice trembling. Yes, relief and joy lit Ethan's face brighter than the sunset. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then drew her into his arms. For the first time since the night of the crash, Ethan Ward felt whole again, not because of his wealth or his recovery, but because he had finally found what he had been missing all along: love. News of their engagement spread quickly, headlines spinning with fascination. But Ethan and Clara didn't care about the noise. For them, The only thing that mattered was the life they were building together, one forged not from power, but from survival, trust, and devotion. And as they stood together on the rooftop, the city glowing beneath them, Clara knew she had found her home. Ward Manor had never looked like this before. Once a fortress of cold marble and inherited wealth, it now bloomed like a sanctuary. White roses lined the pathways, their petals glowing under strings of twinkling lights draped through the towering oaks. Musicians played softly near the fountain, their notes drifting like whispers into the summer air. Guests arrived in hushed awe, not only for the splendor, but for the miracle they had been summoned to witness. At the center of it all, Ethan Ward stood beneath an arch woven with roses and ivy. He wore a tailored suit, but it wasn't the fine fabric that drew eyes, it was the peace etched into his features, the quiet joy of a man who had walked through fire and come out whole. At the end of the aisle, Clara Hayes appeared. Her gown was simple, flowing like water, but her smile outshone everything the manor had to offer. As she stepped forward, her eyes locked with Ethan's, and in that gaze the months of silence, fear, and struggle melted into something timeless. The ceremony began under the fading glow of sunset. Lanterns flickering to life as if stars themselves had descended to bear witness. When it was time for vows, Ethan's voice was steady, carrying not just through the garden but into every heart present. I once believed my worth was measured in the empires I built, the wealth I commanded, the headlines with my name. But when all of that was stripped away, when I lay silent, powerless, I learned the truth. My life was not saved by fortune or power. It was saved by you, Clara. By your voice, your hands, your faith when I had none left. I promise to never again mistake what matters. I promise to walk with you, not ahead, not behind, but beside you for the rest of my days. Tears shimmered in Clara's eyes as she listened. She took his hands, her voice trembling but strong. When I first stepped into your room, I thought I was simply doing my job. But soon, it became more. I found myself talking to you as if you could hear, because somewhere deep inside, I felt you did. And then, against all odds, you came back. Not just for yourself, but for us, Ethan. I promise to never let silence take you again. I promise to stand by you in every storm, in every calm. Because you are not just my patient, you are my partner, my heart, my home. The officiant's voice rang clear. I now pronounce you husband and wife. Ethan cupped Clara's face and kissed her, the kind of kiss that sealed not only vows but lifetimes. The garden erupted in applause, guests rising to their feet. But for Ethan and Clara, the world had already narrowed to two souls bound together by survival and love. The celebration stretched into the night. Lanterns swayed gently in the summer breeze, laughter spilled across the gardens, and music swelled as guests toasted the couple. But amid the revelry, Ethan and Clara slipped away, drawn to the quiet balcony that overlooked the glowing city. The skyline stretched before them, alive and endless. Ethan wrapped an arm around Clara, pulling her close. Do you realize, he said softly, that this is the first time Ward Manor feels like home? Clara leaned into him. Because it was never the walls that made it home. It's us. He kissed her temple, his voice a whisper meant only for her. I once thought I had everything. Tonight, I finally do. In the weeks that followed, their story spread far beyond the city. Newspapers called it a modern miracle. The tale of the billionaire who returned from the brink of death, guided by the devotion of a young nurse. But for Ethan and Clara, none of the headlines mattered. What mattered was the mornings they shared, Clara brewing coffee while Ethan teased her about the hospital cafeteria. What mattered were the evenings in the garden, where laughter echoed louder than any boardroom deal. What mattered was the trust forged in the darkest nights, now carrying them into a future lit by hope. Ethan gradually returned to Ward Enterprises, not as the ruthless CEO of old, but as a leader who had learned the value of people over power. He credited Clara for every decision, every moment of strength, unashamed to tell anyone who asked that she had saved him more than once. Clara, meanwhile, continued her work as a nurse, though now her name carried a story people whispered with admiration. But she never let it change her. To her, she was still the woman who had sat by a silent man's bedside, telling stories into the void because her heart refused to believe he was gone. One night, Months later, Ethan found her in the manor gardens, reading beneath the oaks where they had exchanged vows. He sat beside her, took her hand, and simply said, "Thank you." "For what?" she asked, smiling. "For refusing to give up." He replied, "For proving that love is louder than silence, stronger than betrayal, and brighter than any fortune." Clara's smile softened as she leaned her head against his shoulder. "Then promise me one thing, anything. Never forget where we started, because that's what makes this." She gestured around them, to the lights, the home, their life together, so extraordinary. Ethan kissed her hair. "I couldn't forget if I tried." And beneath the same oaks where they had spoken their vows, they sat together in quiet joy, knowing their story had not ended, but only begun.